Hello, and welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swenson-Ridley, and today I am very excited to be joined by Brittany Cotton. Brittany specializes in leadership, mindset, and executive coaching. She's worked with leaders at Facebook, Microsoft, Live Nation, and Lyft, and she's the Chief Registration Officer and a program leader with Accomplishment Coaching. She is a professional certified coach from the International Coach Federation, and she's also independently contracted with as a coach with Play Big. And I'm excited to have her on here because she is all about talking about breaking habits, making changes, and not BSing ourselves, which is all great things. So Brittany, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So to get started, I just love to hear, I bring a lot of non-health related people onto the show, and we're just laughing at phones ringing because it happens to me too, so it's all good, because there's so much about just mindset and who we are in the world and who we be basically in showing up. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about your story, how you got started doing what you do, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah. So I found myself here by kind of complete surprise, although my parents would probably say, no, the way we raised you totally brought you here. But I was in the academic world. I had finished a master's in environmental literature, and I was applying to PhD programs, and the applications totally just sat me down and kind of slapped me in the face. It started bringing up a lot of questions on my worth. I noticed I had a lot of imposter syndrome and fraud stuff that I never really dealt with. And also, I really got clear that I was just in the motion and just taking the steps that I thought were expected of me. Okay, so I finished undergrad. Okay, now grad school. Okay, I finished my master's, now PhD. And I hadn't really spent a lot of time with myself to get clear on my vision of life and what I wanted outside of society's check boxes for me. So I learned about this leadership and coach training program, and I had no intention of coaching. I actually thought coaching sounded like total BS. But I had met someone who had gone through this program, and they had completely transformed their life and how they showed up. And I was in awe of this change that had happened to them so quickly. So I thought, I really need support around figuring out who I want to be on the planet and how to have impact in a way that, really is a reflection of who I am. So I'm going to do it. So I, still applied to a couple places because I was, I'm a type A plan B kind of person. But a month into this leadership and coach training program, I started getting clients. And by year's end, I quit all my other jobs. I was working in the service industry. I was a research assistant and a teacher's assistant at a university. And I really feel like I found my calling, which is really just supporting people and getting clear on what's the experience you want to have on the planet, who are you, and how do you actually integrate these two things to show up so powerfully that you're filled with joy and satisfaction, but you're also the catalyst for others to find that as well. So I got here.
I love that. And there's lots that we can dive into and unpack just from your story. But, I love coaching. So I have a doctorate hat, as we've talked about, as a chiropractor, but, I really always, I look back on my life kind of like you, and I've always gravitated more towards coaching. Like I did a lot of kind of leadership work and, personal development and training going through chiropractic school in particular, because there's a lot that challenges you as a business owner for sure. And then, similar to you, I finally found coaching. And what I love about it is it's about creating like, what is your life, and not worrying about what everyone thinks and everyone else says and all of those things. And so, maybe we can dive into this conversation, but for the women, because the women I work with and, those who listen to the show, I know a lot of us are in like transitionary periods and where we're trying to figure out like, what's that next thing? Maybe it's coming out of a career that wasn't really that satisfying, or, embracing change after menopause, or like some of these different things. So for those who are listening and maybe like feeling stuck or struggling or like unclear on who you are and what your passion is, like, do you have a place that you usually start with people, or like somewhere to start honing in on that?
Yeah, I think that we get so inundated by the idea of what phase we're in. right? Like there's story and narrative attached to menopause, and there's story and narrative attached to transitioning from motherhood back to career, or career to motherhood, or both, right? And we get caught up in the titles of it, what it's supposed to look like, who we're supposed to be, or how we're supposed to show up. I scrap all of that. I think that the world would be a different place and transitions would be experienced differently if instead we focused on that thing we're ultimately committed to. So in a transition, you might really look at, okay, what's the experience I'm committed to having in this? Not the titles, not the amount of money, not, what's the result I want to have, but literally what's the experience I'm committed to having? And then getting clear on that, like making a list, really diving into what's the experience I want to have. And then I invite people to make a list of, hey, what are the default commitments? Like what are likely to show up that are going to get in the way of those higher level commitments I have? Like, binge watching something on TV, or reading magazines that don't actually make me feel good, or scrolling on Instagram, or whatever it is for you. But hey, what are those default commitments that are likely going to show up and get in the way? And then having clarity on the two options you have, and always just making a conscious decision of where you're actually choosing from. And from there, I feel like any transition, you actually get to create what you want to create inside of it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And, and so often I think, especially as women, we tend to let, some of those other commitments, or what society thinks, or what our, mom ingrained in us when we were a kid about who we're supposed to be as a woman. Like we let these other things get in our way. And I know you talk a lot about kind of not taking any BS. So how do you decide what's BS and what's like some crap that we're telling ourselves that's actually keeping us stuck, and what's truth, what's reality, what's this is the thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
But. Yeah, that makes sense. I think the first place I would go in that conversation would be to ask yourself, what's mine? Like we have so many stories and voices in our head. So one of the things I like to do to note if something is BS or not, and sometimes my BS detector is really good, and sometimes I'm good at hiding it, right?
Yeah, right.
Depending on what I want to do that day. But I think it's really like, hey, whose voice is this, and where is it coming from? Mm-hmm. Because so often I think we inundate ourselves with somebody else's idea of something. And that to me is where most of our bullshit comes from, our BS comes from, is stuff that we're telling ourselves over and over that A, isn't actually getting us to where we want to go, or B, is somebody else's voice.
Yeah.
So it start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, listening to some of your story, we parallel in a lot of ways, because I was very driven just by, there's some level of status, or like, this is the next thing that I do. And for me, it was a lot in business. I've been talking about this a lot lately, but a lot of the women who listen are also entrepreneurial, so it works. But yeah, it was like I made all these decisions based on pleasing everybody else who worked for me and not myself. And I burned out and crashed and burned and realized that I hated every minute of it, and, and kind of burned that thing down and recreated what I do in a way that's healthy for me finally. But, how I know for a lot of people, women in particular, it can be hard to stop being a people pleaser. And like, it's so ingrained in us to always do that. And I'm not really sure what my question is in here, but, as we're talking about transformation and making change, like, it's not really so much where do we start, but like, where do you go to recognize, like, I really need to do something differently here?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes that I never hear that often, that I think is so great, and we could even say it's a principle rather than a quote, but Gandhi said that integrity is when your speaking, actions, and intentions are in alignment. And so one of the things I do with my clients is I have them actually create an out of integrity list. Hey, where in your life are your speaking, actions, and intentions not actually in alignment? And I think that's always a really powerful place to start, is actually getting clear of where are we not cohesively operating inside of that. And it's such a great way to see what themes show up, because you might notice, oh, I got my speaking and my intention here, but my action is out of place. Or my speaking and action are here, but I'm not clear on my intention. And so I feel like it's a really good place to start to get clear on what part of that do you need to work on, and what area of life is actually out for you that once restored might give you very clear on where to start when you're looking at transformation or transition.
Absolutely. There's actually so much to that integrity conversation. And when we're out of integrity, like talking about health, we start to break down. One of the big things I talk about is like when we're not voicing our true self, it actually starts to affect our thyroid because it's, interfering with, if we get into chakras and all that stuff, like with the energy flow in our bodies. And so it becomes a really big deal. So I love that,
Yeah. And it's and I love that you attaching it to, our bodies and our physical health. Cause I think that there's so much to learn there that people still kind of ignore, right? Or just, it's one of my favorite conversations with my clients. If they show up with a sore throat or, something in their gut, I'm like, hey, how does this relate to the conversation we've been having about using your voice or, where you're keeping your power? And I think integrity in and of itself is a conversation around power, because when we're in integrity, we're generating ourselves in a way that really has our whole being have to show up, and when we're not in integrity, it's actually a really big power leak because there's some aspect of ourselves that we're not honoring or operating inside of.
Absolutely. And when we leak power, we inevitably develop, symptoms, or we end up stuck in a rut and can't get out, and those things. So that's such a huge piece of the pie. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And then, in terms of like, so we're listening to the show and we're like, okay, I'm out of integrity in like XYZ area. My life is falling apart now. I'm clear on that. Like, how do we start to actually, I know you talk a lot about kind of breaking habits, and I've talked about several books that I've read, but like, what's your input on where do you actually begin to form new habits and get out of the rut?
Simplicity. The thing I dislike about January 1st is this cultural conversation we get in about resolution and fully transforming something as if we're going to just, transform our whole way of being about something like that. And I think that that's a common story we have about personal development or even transformation, right? That people think it's this huge thing that you're taking on. Like, I am such a fan of baby steps. So for people listening, hearing this about integrity or transition, one of my, bringing BS back into this too, one of my favorite things to do with people is write down all the excuses you have about why you don't have something or why life isn't the way it is, right? It doesn't have to be all the excuses in the world, but maybe something you're focused on, right? Career or creative endeavor or relationship. Write down all the excuses you have about it. And then circle the top 5 that show up the most. And then choose 2 that you're going to focus on actually shifting your relationship around. And I can't guarantee anything as a coach, but the changes I've seen people make by just eradicating or shifting 2 small things that they typically tell themselves over and over or choose to believe, how the benefit that can have. So that's where I would start. I would, and it doesn't have to be excuses. You could make a list of, all the things you want to take on inside of a transition, and then focus on one. What's one thing every day you're going to move forward? That's all you need to transform something, is do something different every day.
Yeah, I love that. And it's, it's just that conscious choice to like, today I'm going to choose something different from normal. And once you do it enough, it becomes habit and becomes a new way of being. So
I've never thought this before, but you just gave me an idea of a way to look at it. That to me, like, BS is the antithesis of choice. Because when we're operating in some sort of BS, we're usually victim to something or allowing something to impact our mood or what we're choosing or what we're experiencing. Yeah. And choice is actually saying, no, here's how I'm going to be about this, or here's how I'm going to show up today. And again, like restoring of power, but choice is just such a different place to be living from. And people forget it. They do choose choice.
Yeah, especially, and you just triggered a memory in me that I'm going to share now, because I was actually going to do an episode talking about this, but we're just going to do it right now. We can discuss. So part of my training that I did in chiropractic school was through something called landmark education. And so it's basically like, you look like you're familiar with it, but yeah, it, like it helps you take on life transformation, right? It's kind of like life education. And I was actually selected to do one of the exercises at the end of our weekend, which essentially was, they just say chocolate or vanilla, choose. And generally when we try to make that choice, right, we're like trying to list all the reasons why chocolate is better or vanilla is better, or like, what I feel that day. And the point of the exercise was that a choice is just choice. And so, I choose chocolate because I choose chocolate. Like there's no backstory, there's no explanation, there's no justification of it. And there's so much freedom and power in that. And I think you just hit the nail on the head, with that. That's just another example. So like, for example, I was working through my relationship with my dad and that, and wanting him to be something else. And like, we have to recognize there's things we can't change, right? The only thing we can change is ourselves. And so I could choose my dad, or I could not choose my dad. And like that, when you simplify it, and like you said, simplification earlier, there's so much that opens up, and it's really about restoring our power and not having to, we don't have to do a dissertation on why we're making a choice.
Right.
So, yeah. So anyways, you just sparked that memory.
Yeah. It's such a great reminder. And I remember that part of Landmark. And what did it remind me of? That, it's so funny. I think we're really well trained in life happening to us versus that I actually chose this, or that I choose whatever comes my way. And again, I'm realizing a theme in this conversation we're having, that it's kind of like where we're empowered or where we're actually giving away our power. Yeah. And I think any time where we're explaining or justifying our choices, it's kind of, it occurs sometimes like a giving away of our power, that we feel the need to have to explain ourselves or make someone see or something, versus simply that there's power in simply choosing something, and just that being that simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think it's really beneficial with health, with life, with anything, to like look at where you're giving your power away, because it's a result of, being out of integrity, or maybe some imposter syndrome. We haven't gotten into that conversation too much yet, but, it's a result of these things, and you are the one who is capable of changing that. Like, there's not some magical wand somewhere that's going to make it all different. It comes from within you, and connecting to that power.
Yeah. And I think that's why people sometimes resist personal transformation or development, because, it can be daunting and scary to think I'm fully in charge of this. And depending on what the topic is, it also can feel, I don't want to say wrong, but right, like there are things that happen where if someone says, oh, well, that was your choice to be with it that way, that can be very triggering and, trigger trauma. But the thing I think to remember to always regain self-power is choice of what we're taking with that, or reacting from that place. And like back to my whole point was that, yes, it is uncomfortable. And it also, I'm sure there's some people listening who are like, I don't want any more responsibility. Like, I don't need any more. Right. Right. But I think that's where the power lies in coaching or personal work or work on the body. It's really like, wow, what if I do have full responsibility of this? Like, what's the delicious benefit of it versus the, oh man, like one more thing I have to be in charge of.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love that idea of like taking responsibility for ourselves, because a lot of times we want to blame everything else. And I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about, but if that scares you, this may not be the time, but come back to this when you're ready. Like, you have to, and that's another thing. You really have to be in a place where you're ready to take on doing life differently. Like, that's essentially what we're talking about. So
which goes back to the simple thing, like just choose one thing to do differently and you will produce a different result.
Awesome. I love it. So just to recap, and we'll see if there's anything else we want to add on here. We've got doing things simple. Keep it simple, KISS. um,
I've never heard that. I love it.
yeah, keep it simple, stupid, or silly, or, whatever you want to put in there. Looking at your integrity, making a list of things where you're, out of integrity and giving your power away. And then just the power and choice. So I think all of those are like gold mines in their own. Like, even if you just did one of those things or looked at it one of those directions, that's huge.
Yeah, I love that you just said that, because even if someone, like, say someone's listening and they just write on a Post-it note, simple, choose, and what was the other one? I already forgot.
Integrity.
Integrity.
Yeah.
And even if you're not having the experience you want, or you're in overwhelm, or you're stressed, or you're having a bad day, or you want things to go different, looking at that and being like, what's one, I could choose one of these things. Okay, simplicity. Great. What's one simple thing I'm going to do today to give myself a different experience? Or what's one thing I could create for myself to restore integrity today? Or what's one thing I haven't chosen, right? But it's not like you don't even need to do all three, right? You could really just focus on one, and then, trust that it will give you something different for the day. If you want something different, we all deserve days where we feel terrible and do nothing. Like that's true too.
That's totally fine. I actually talk about our cycle and how, our energy levels are different depending on where we are in our cycle as a woman. And some days we need the blanket and the cup of tea and a good book, and like, we don't move. That's okay.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I absolutely agree. And like, it's about just starting somewhere. You don't have to. I feel like so many women I talk to are hung up on the results, and like, they want to see results immediately, and they have this big, transformational thing that needs to happen to get them there. And the reality is, like, we have to enjoy the journey. I think it was Trent Shelton, I believe is his name. He's a football player, but I've heard him say, our past is what gets us, and the journey is what gets us to where we want to go, and where we are. And so you gotta take the time to enjoy the ride.
Yeah. And like, I kind of wonder, like, this result oriented thing, like that's a place where I often ask myself, is that my voice? Is that my thing, or is that someone else's?
Yeah.
Because I think that in the United States, particularly in Western culture, capitalism, right? It's like result, result, result. And it's fine if you are like, if that living that way provides you with something and has you operate in total potential. But that's another place where I'm like, hey, is that actually yours? Or do you have a story that if you don't produce a result, it's less than, or the process in and of itself isn't important?
I love that.
So I put that in.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Because I think even I, and like, a lot of this who we're talking to are high performing women, high achieving women, which both of us definitely fall into that category. And inside of that, it can be, what's driving you to do the thing that you're doing, and is it really like who you really are, and taking the time to identify that. So that's huge.
Yeah. And I think as high performers, we get so good at what we're doing that we don't have to be conscious of it anymore, right? Like, we are the literal autopilots walking around. And things work in that place. So, I'm not suggesting get out of that place, but I think that's where some of those habits or BS tendencies can occur, is because we're so good at performing and doing the thing that we don't have to do it consciously. And so we get into that place where we're maybe not doing something the way that it actually serves us, or not doing something that doesn't even serve us at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, it also takes courage to recognize that and then do something about it. So just, you may have like big aha moments and realizations. And I know I've had periods in my life where like the amount of transformational change has kind of ebbed and flowed. Like, there's been years where it's been like, I don't know what just happened, but like, I'm a completely different person and it's awesome. And years where it's like, that wasn't that exciting, but it's all part of the process, right? And it's about, finding that stability and finding the courage to really move forward. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And it's like, same thing, writing down the three things we summarize and choosing one of them and implementing it is a big deal. Like, as humans, we're so reliable to just, we're so good at just doing the thing over and over again. So anytime you choose outside of a habit or choose to do something different that day, it is a big deal. And I think that's also what people can practice, is acknowledging themselves for steps taken, regardless of a result.
Yes. I think that's a big piece, especially for us ladies, is,
Yeah.
we tend to focus on everything that's wrong or everything we haven't done and ignore like the 80 million things we did actually get done. Right. So,
if there's anything I've learned from my dating life, it's that I'm great at finding out what's wrong. Let me tell you. So, I have a A+ in finding that. So that's actually something I'm practicing a lot, is what is working. Yeah.
Good. That's great.
Yeah.
And that'll evolve. And I have been through a divorce and gotten remarried, and it's totally different this time around in a really good way. So you'll get there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, where can people connect with you if they want more Brittany in their life?
Yeah. So my company's called Be Radical. So my website is beradicalcoaching.com. You can find me there. Buttons are super easy to then book a free call just to connect. If you heard something on this conversation that sparked something for you or you want support around, love hearing from people. And I know we kind of both talked about the benefit of coaching. And so if also you're listening to this and you're interested in coaching skills or becoming a coach, I would have people check out accomplishmentcoaching.com. That's where I train coaches in leadership. And to me, that's like the place that transformed my life and my leadership. So I'm always inviting people to come look there as well.
I'll have to check it out, because I'm always continuing to learn, and I'm actually in a PhD program right now too. So it's
the people in programs I find are always people who also then are interested in looking for a program. My program people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is good that, we're always evolving. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and, just digging into this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.